All right, welcome to another screencast where I'm going to be working on combat training. So in the last one, I just touched on kind of where we're going and where we're at the moment. So at the moment, we can select a repository, store it in min.io, and we're embedding the files into the Milvus Vector DB. Now is to begin this kind of second stage here of prompting against the DB. And doing all kinds of different prompts, like selecting the files, or just doing similarity searches across the entire collection inside Milvus. So there's a whole bunch of different things we can do. But to make things easier in terms of the UI and actually using the application, I'm going to start off with making this schema in Prisma. And then when you go through this process here of creating a repository, it'll actually save the repository, and then you can view things like all the files for that repository, and you can just have some handy functions to trigger the kind of processing task that we have here on for trigger.dev to actually process the repository. So you can do things like refreshing just very easily instead of having to do this whole thing every time. So mostly some of the schema, the UI, and that'll just help with setting everything up so that I can add these next few features very quickly, like prompting and selecting files and all that. So starting off with the schema, let's go. Okay. And let's also just check that everything is running. So I'm going to run everything. I don't think I actually need to run trigger just yet, but what I will do is go into services and just run that. Just make sure that's running. Yeah. All right. So Next.js is running, and let's just close everything here. I'm going to go to Prisma schema. And I think they give you this example table, which is not really necessary. So I'm just going to work off of that table, and I'm going to move it down to the bottom. And yeah, okay. So we have a repository. All right, so ID name is fine. I want to store the URL, so that's going to be the actual Git URL for the repository. And I think that's actually basically it for now. I'm just going to copy this. Then we're going to do a file. Now a file is going to need to link to the repository. I'm going to include the path. Created at and updated at is not maybe necessary. So content is also not necessary because we're basically just storing the file in min.io, and then this is just going to be a reference to that file. Now, I think maybe this should actually be URL, right? So this is pointing to min.io. Okay. Then index is something we can think about just now. So repo ID is an integer. Then I need the repository, which is going to be a repository item or repository field. So that's the lookup, and that makes sense. And then I'll do an index on the repo ID, and then just by saving that, I'm going to call this files, so I can do the reverse lookup on the repository for all the files. Okay. So let's do migrate dev and just see. Okay, I think I just had some corruption with my database, but everything's back up now. So the migration name is going to be called, let's just say repository. Okay, and let's go here. So here's that first migration, which actually, it has everything. So, which is fine. So, okay. Now we have the migration there. I'm going to npm run dev now. Okay, we no longer have the example repository or example table anymore. So I don't think, here it is, right? But it's fine. I'm going to change these methods now because this is the repo router. So this is actually supposed to do .repository.find all or find many. I might need to restart a couple things to just take effect. Okay. I don't think, although there's no other routers, so that's the only way that can happen. So here in the create, right, now we actually want to be storing the repositories when they're created. So I'm going to need to send this event after the repository is actually created. So I'm going to go here and say Prisma, well, this is context, which comes from here. .db .repository create, and so the data here, right, we need a URL, which is the simplest one. The name, yeah, popping the name off of, yeah, it's not that simple, but let's go with that for now. This can just be like that, yeah. Created at is optional, files optional, ID, yeah, so it's basically just that. Okay, so this is the repository. And here I'm including the repo URL, but I'm also going to add the repository ID into the payload because, and then at the end I'll return this, because in this event of repo.create, which is over here, the payload is going to take repo ID, which is a number. Here we can then use Prisma to fetch that record. And I mean, I'm assuming, yeah, because schema is usually primitives, so I don't think you could pass in DB objects. It would make more sense to just pass in the ID and then refetch it in this task. And then once we have the context here, or have that repository here, so let's do, I think it's DB, okay. Let's go and say repository. This is going to be find first auth row. And then the ID is the payload ID, yeah. Okay, so that's going to give you the repository. And then we can basically create all the files like we're doing here. So here's all the rows. But this is rows for the embeddings. So before it's over here. Yeah. Okay, so file contents, I'm going to say file objects instead. And what I want to do here is I want to return the path and the content. And then the reason for that is then I can say for object in those objects, then I can just pass the content into the chunking piece over there. But then over here, I wonder why this is complaining. It's file content toString. There we go. Then over here, I can create the file objects for the database, right? So I can say db.file create many, okay? Kind of letting Copilot help here. So the data is going to be, I wonder actually, yeah. So data needs a URL passed in here. So there's no content and there's no path. It's going to be a URL. But the question is, because these are all unfortunately, these are still the local paths. These are not the actual paths from once it's stored in min.io, which should be done over here. So what I actually want to just try out is if I go to the min.io console. Okay, so it looks like I unfortunately don't have any of the buckets left, which is probably because I accidentally deleted the volumes. So I'm just going to do here, but I need to make sure that trigger's running. So what I'm just doing here is I'm creating the bucket, but I know that eventually sometimes there's going to be situations where the bucket already exists. So I'm just handling that here. Okay, so submit this and let's check out the runs. Okay, so that's completed. Now let's just double check that everything actually is where it's supposed to be. Okay, so it's uploaded to min.io. The data has been inserted into Milvus. So this task is completed basically. Now, if I go, what I want to do is select the database. And then I'm just going to say view over here. Okay, so we have a repository table. I'm just going to say select the first 1000, and there we can see, right, those are the inserted rows. And obviously I've done this a few times, so now it's showing 3 rows. So we know everything is being created. Let's see files as well. All right, there we go. Now, but these URLs are not correct. Obviously, this is the URL to the local directory or local file path. So the actual file path would be just that, but on top of the min.io URL. So that part I just still need to figure out. But for now, at least it's fine. We're storing it somewhere. Okay, so now let's go and display everything in the UI. So this is going to be the UI part. Pages, we just have the index.js for the moment. What I'm going to do is just separate things out with tabs. So I'm going to have like a repositories tab and then like a upload or create tab. So I have a component for that from this shad cn. I think it's tabs. Yeah, it's over here. Okay. Right, so this is what it kind of looks like. We already have it installed, so we just use it like this, define the tabs and what goes inside them. All right, so this is going to be over here. Let's put it inside over here. And then I need to import all these things. So this is going to be tabs, but I think, no, we just, yeah, just like this. Okay. Okay. So the first one is going to be, let's put my repositories and then add. Okay, then for the first one, so this will be my repos add and add. Okay, this is all going to go inside here. And then this is going to be our table. So what I'll do is I'm just going to put the function component over here. So I'm going to call it repo table. You know, I actually think we could probably just use the table component they have here as well. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. Okay, table, I think we also have locally. So all of this is local. Table head, the body, and the cell, and yeah. Okay, so that's like that. And then this, I just put in here. Now I think I like this, giving it like a heading. So let's do it like this. Okay. Now, obviously, we still need to give it the correct data. But for example, this is what it looks like at the moment. So you've got my repositories and add. Okay. Now the repo table is going to take in a list of repositories, right? Right. And then in the table body, we can loop through those and create table rows. This needs one more bracket. And then the key, repo.id. This is a list of repositories. So mapping through that, then we can just define what we want the rows to show. Okay. So now we need to fetch the repositories. So usually I would write a hook for this, but I think we can just use the API in this case and just go straight there. So we'll do get all use query. And then we can access the data here like this. Right, and then we can also put like loading states. Okay. So a little bit of work needs to just be done on the formatting, obviously. But everything looks okay. Overview, I think we can remove that caption. Okay, so far looks all right. We'll just improve this over time. So in this My Repositories table, one thing I want to do here is just be able to click the name and then this will take you to a new page where you can then view all the files. Yeah, so if you click this, it's going to take you to a page, and then same thing, it'll be a table with all the files for that repository. So this is going to be inside pages. Just going to create repos, let's say, and then we can do inside that, we can do repo id .tsx, okay, and it's going to be pretty similar to this page. So this will be the file table, which is going to take in files. That's going to be a file list, the name of the file, the URL/path. So this, we're just going to map through all the files. File, yeah, I guess it's just URL is the only thing that's needed. So this will be file. Okay, this will be, we can move the URL here. Okay. So here, I'm just going to remove some of this. The tab here to add a file, I guess, is maybe not necessary, but what I will probably do is say like actions. Yeah, so like helper actions. And the idea here is then so that we can do things like refreshing, triggering tasks again. So kind of like a basic settings page. And this will be files.length. And then this is going to be very similar. Here on the router, we need a method to fetch all the files for a repository. So we'll say get files, which is going to be file.findMany, where the repo ID is going to be the ID from the input. But we also need to then take that input there. So this will be the repo ID. All right. And this will be input.repo ID, just like that. Okay. So that's the endpoint to get all the files. So we can do this here. Get files. Let's just make sure this is a query. Yes. We need to pass in the repo ID, which is going to come from, I think you use the params. Yeah, so for example, use params on dashboard team, where path name is dashboard Next.js, would return the team value as Next.js. So here, I think you can set the type to be like this, repo ID. I think you can only do strings. Okay, and then here we need to just pass the repo ID. All right. And this is going to be files. Okay, so just fixing everything up here. And right, so now I need to just make a link from this page to that detail view, basically. So in the table here, I'm just going to wrap this in a link. All right, and then this is going to be repos repo.id. Okay. All right, so we click this, and there we go. That looks pretty good. We get the number of files. Maybe instead of calling over here, call this actions. All right, so helper actions, which we don't have right now, but right, there's all the files. I'll also just change the heading here so that it takes you back to the home page, which I think is in the layout. So this is going to be combat training. Okay, we need to wrap this in a link. Right. And yeah, so now we can at least do some basic navigation. Okay, cool. So I'm going to leave it here for this video because we've at least completed the UI in some sense. And then going forward, if we go back to Excalidraw, so we're storing everything in the database now. Of course, we can still add some more functionality around like deleting repositories and all that. But this at least sets up the foundation for doing these things here, which is going to be prompting. We still need to set the correct file URL, but that's not too complicated. So we can do things like viewing a file or prompting against a specific file. So kind of like an editor where you can view all the contents of the file and prompt against it, asking questions about the file basically. And then, yeah, different kinds of prompts and stuff. So we are pretty much getting there. Because we can see the repository, we can see the files. So there's only, for example, we could do a click here that takes you to an editor to view this file. And there's maybe like an input there to ask questions about the file. But there's many ways we can do this. So lots to think about. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.